साईं तू ही मेरा सच्चा साईं, तू है मैं तेरा बंदा, तू ही मेरा मौला साईं, तू ही मेरा मौला साईं। सयोनी सयोनी चैन एक पल नहीं, चैन एक पल नहीं, चैन एक पल नहीं, और कोई हल नहीं। सयोनी 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 Nice, nicely done, fellas.
Wow.
Sayuni. Which was not, well, we did Sai. That was probably their first spiritual, religious song, if you guys would agree with me.
I disagree with you.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Omer Qazi.
Round one, fight.
I mean, I just said it for the sake of disagreement. I really don't know what I'm saying. Was it really their first spiritual song?
I can't think of anything in Talash or the first album.
Which album was Sai on? It wasn't on Azadi, right?
Sai was an Inqilab.
Inqilab. But it has a very Azadi sound.
It has a very Azadi sound. So that probably segued into Azadi. But I don't remember. I mean, I remember folk songs. In you know, there's obviously Heat in the first album, which is very folk.
Right.
And then in Talash, there's Bhigi Yade, which is not really. It's more of a rock ballad anyway, I think.
So actually, I'm gonna push back a little bit. Ghaflat in Talash.
That's not a Sufi religious song. That's more of a humanitarian. But then yeah,
right? I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, everything's open to interpretation.
Because the idea of
I actually tried to propose to you that Khwab might have been a spiritual song, but you pushed back against that.
I mean, I thought it was just because in the context that I saw it Khwab in the Ahad drama.
Right.
It was part of that soundtrack, and it was kind of a relationship.
Lekin Ghaflat, yeah, like
what about Iltija? Iltija was also in Inqilab, but Ghaflat, you know, the idea of Ghafla is there, right? Which is kind of a spiritual concept.
That is a spiritual concept.
But they, I found out recently that they made that song on climate change.
Did they really, or are they kind of reappropriating their own song for the modern?
But then you can.
Yeah, Salman bhai, आपने कश्मीर के बारे में गाना बनाया, हाँ क्यों नहीं बनाया?
चोरी आजा.
Made for India.
But that's the beauty of songs, like you can reappropriate them, like Ghaflat, right? Khushk patte, bikne zameen pe, right? And then you know, it keeps going.
बात तो ऐसा आपकी सही है, लेकिन फिर भी there are some like religious undertones to it. But
yeah, so I actually thought it was more of a song about the meek and the innocent people of the world, like the metaphor being, you know, they're the khushk patte jin pe kabhi saya nahi aata, kabhi ki kabhi inke upar bhi chhaw aaye, you know. So that's what I thought. But then, hey, if he wants to reappropriate for climate change,
it's their song, really. Do whatever he wants. Right? It's his. But you know, at a certain point, oh, never mind. I was just gonna say, when your songs get popular enough and you become popular enough, you're not an owner of the art anymore. It's part of the public domain, and the people own it. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Yeah. Back to Junoon's,
like Dil Pakistan.
Yeah, Dil Pakistan. I mean, you just. Well, I mean, you know what? One thing that I will say for both of the songs that we just did, you know, Sayuni, there's a quality of sort of being lost or being abandoned and kind of searching for something.
And in many ways, I mean, this goes back to what Omer has mentioned many times, is that there is this like progression that you see, right, within Junoon's element of just being able to kind of really express the human condition, and also I think in many ways their own condition. They sort of did begin to get a little bit more sort of direct about their religious identity, but in many ways I think they were kind of searching for it in the mid 90s, and that's what Sai Sayoni kind of denotes. Aas hai teri, pyas hai teri, mera sacha sai tu hai.
So that's a revolution in like songwriting and whatnot, or concepts. There's also a revolution taking place in sound and music composition, where Salman Ahmad said about the intro part to Sai, the guitar part. That's on a Hijaz scale, which is really interesting. I think, as a matter of fact, me and Omer were talking the other day, and didn't you say that it's also kind of, Salman Ahmad said that it's imitation of the Azan as well?
It was in an interview. He said, this is the Hijaz. Every area of the world has a different type of Azan, the melody that they use, and this is what he calls it, the Hijazi scale. And he actually said, this is kind of like the Azan, like Allah.
Yeah. And if you guys seen the movie The Message. If you listen to the soundtrack of that, you'll see it's in the same scale. And a lot of that you can imagine playing that on the guitar.
It is kind of a spiritual Eastern scale. I like it, that D minor scale. A lot of Sayoni, Sai, that's why we match those two together. They're on the same exact scale.
Yeah, but it's not a straight up D minor. It's like there's some notes that are varied.
Right.
There's a couple of notes here and there, which makes it that Arab, scale.
This topic is so dear and near to us, we forgot to introduce ourselves and the episode.
I was just about to say that, and before we do that though, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, is that different scales actually invoke different kind of like sort of thoughts and feelings and emotions within you. Anyway, to introduce ourselves, my name is Hamad Alam. How you all doing, everyone? Really, really happy to have you with us again. I have with me here
Ali Qazi,
my good friend, and then of course the one and only.
I am here, Omer Qazi.
I am here.
I am here too.
I'm here as well.
They make me sit in the back of the room.
Hello sirs, hello sirjis.
They don't treat me right. Somebody call for help.
यार अब मेहनत करोगे तो फिर इसी तरह से ऊपर आओगे.
खाने वाने तो ढंग से.
पानी नहीं मिला, 2 दिन हो गए.
यार देखो ये सारी जो dirty laundry है ये सबके सामने नहीं दिखाते
We
यार.
do kind of have a very shabby setup.
मुझे मार पिटेगी.
That's why when we started out, I wanted to call this Broke Studio.
By the way, that is not a plea for donations by any means. But
we do what we can.
But just to show you that we have love and passion for this project.
Well, we talked about this, right? Like the only reason this podcast came about is because we were chatting one day about these things.
Right.
We're like, hey man, we should put this on a podcast and put it up.
And I think the other thing is that I think this history, or this this movement, frankly, needs to be recorded, and it needs to be
documented.
It needs to be documented.
Anyways, we're all hanging out. Thank you for hanging out with us. We feel like you guys are here, and the way we feel that is when you guys comment on Facebook, leave your feedback. We like to engage with our listeners. So please keep that up. We love it. We want to hear your feedback, any corrections, any mistakes we're making.
Yeah, please, corrections.
Yeah, I mean, Ali just talks and talks.
I just talk off the top of my head. So I don't know what I'm getting wrong and what I'm getting right.
And by the way, if you notice, I try to contextualize things in actual history, and then I just get
Hamad tried so hard, Ali just can't stop talking.
But okay, so let's talk a little bit. Last time we touched on Junoon's political identity, their politics. Particularly Salman Ahmad, and also I think which I really appreciated, Ali. You touched on Ali Asmad's politics as well, and kind of where he was coming from. And this is something that I'm really excited about talking about, is how Junoon kind of represented itself as another, I guess, presence when it comes to contemporary Muslim or Islamic identity, right? And I think that obviously many people sort of classify them as Sufi rock, but in fact it went actually beyond their music, right? I mean, I think their music definitely had a quality of sort of an openness, a searching, a Sufistic element of like discovering the self and kind of becoming one with not just Allah, but also I think in many ways with the world.
Well, a lot of it coming from classical Sufi poetry.
Right, exactly, absolutely. It came directly from there. But I think it's also interesting to see where, especially I think after 9/11, but in many ways even before that.
But that religious context changed so much. Like when they're doing Sai and Iltija and these things in the mid-90s, even like Sayuni and all that stuff, Pakistani culture in terms of its religion is a little bit different versus what it is after like immediate post 9/11 and then much later and then now.
So do you mean the more sort of the stringent kind of strain of Islam that kind of started entering the 90s and the 2000s? वो लोग कहते हैं ना कि भाई ये जो मतलब मैं क्या बोलूँ, I don't want to sort of come up with labels, but I think the whole sort of like the Saudi sort of Wahhabi influence,
right.
Is that what you're talking about?
So that definitely had an impact on Salman Ahmad because he talks about this, that in his college days or whatever, he was doing this little thing at a talent show, and then Jamaati students
Jamaat Islami.
Yeah, shout out. They stormed the stage.
Right.
And that was his first exposure to them, I guess.
And
this was Zia era when
Right.
they were a lot more empowered anyway, so they were kind of running amok, right?
Right.
So they had that power and they were doing that.
Yeah. Actually, that prompts a question then on my end is that in many ways Zia's era, you're right. These bands, whether it was Vital Signs or Junoon, Jupiter's Strings, all of them. In many ways were able to break onto the scene because of the end of the Zia era, which was marked with a lot of obviously political repression, but ostensibly a kind of Islamization project, which is known as an Islamization project. And so what I'm wondering is, do you think that there was kind of, do you think that like the sort of the Sufi or Islamic elements that come through in Junoon songs start to come through in Inqilab?
Well, so interestingly enough,
do you think that was kind of a response, a reaction to be? Because here's my thought. Is that in many ways I think that neoliberal sort of establishment, the जो आप कहते हैं burger जो establishment था पाकिस्तान में, right? They were not associated with that, right? They were not associated with kind of a closeness to this kind of Islamic South Asian religious history.
True.
But do you think it's a personal thing that Salman Ahmad had, or do you think it was kind of like an effort to kind of push back? I mean, it was just an evolution.
I think it could be. I think it very well could be a personal thing that Salman had, because in that same Zia era where people are storming, Jamaatis are storming the stage, Salman is also exposed to Qawwali at a young age, and he's actually inspired by it. He remembers, he writes in his book about being at one of his uncles Ran's wedding, and then they invited a Qawwal to sing there, and he really liked it a lot. And so I guess he took those two parallels with him, as he obviously did more favor to the Sufi side of things,
right?
While always be consistently attacked by the other side, the fundamentalists.
So this is a good point to make, going back to the song that we started with, Sain, right? Okay, Qawwali is one thing, right? It's part of the culture. It's folk, right? You have the traditional instruments, the harmonium, the tabla, and the hamdawa, the clapping, and
it's
the,
more
and
of
the
an
vocals.
accepted form.
It's an accepted form. What Saini did, what Ali Azmat screams at the end. What does he end the song with, right? Allah. He's screaming Allah, right?
Yeah.
And there's guitars and drums behind it.
Right.
I personally had never heard any song like that from Pakistan that combined those elements together. And that initially,
that's
as a conservative upbringing, religious upbringing, the first thing that came to mind was, this is blasphemy. This is not right.
Yeah, a lot of us went that way.
So it was hard to accept. But I mean, the song was amazing. How could you not accept it?
Really? So I didn't have that experience because I grew up in an observant household.
Sure.
But I also grew up in a household where music was very much a thing, and it was not frowned upon. In fact, it was celebrated every weekend. We would have whoever the artists were in our family who would play. And I actually found, but I do agree with you that it was something that was very unique. That
I think the uniqueness,
the blending of that rock element.
Yes, the Western rock.
Right.
It's not that it was, because like I said, Qawwali is an accepted traditional form.
Yeah.
It's not like the first time you're combining music with the Allah's name, right?
Yeah,
this is the first time.
Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan was probably the first Sufi rock artist.
And he did a lot of pop remixes and things like that up until before even Junoon formed. But Junoon was doing this classic Led Zeppelin, type of rock music and combining God's name with it. So
a lot of it does come from Nusrat Fateh, because Salman Ahmad spent time with him, touring and whatnot, playing for him, and he engaged in deep conversations with him, got really inspired by him.
Right. So that's what I'm saying.
Some of his advice.
This was the new thing that they were adding that did not exist before.
Which, by the way, I just want to touch on something is that even so, I don't know where this name Sufi rock even comes from.
It comes from India.
It comes from India.
They actually put that label because when Sayuni became famous in India.
I see.
And they really give Junoon a huge boost globally.
So and I'm not sure if like Junoon itself ever described itself as a Sufi rock band, but even that name to me, Sufi rock, is, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit. There's a little bit of a problem with that. The reason why,
interesting enough, Ali Asmat never liked that label.
Yeah,
because he was like not even into into being
an identity,
into the Sufi rock genre, because I remember one interview which was I was reading off of the internet that it was probably a magazine interview where they were talking about how to describe your sound, and Ali Asmat goes, "Oh, we're a funk rock band.
Right.
We're not a classical folk or Sufi rock." And then the writer of that blog writes that, "Oh, Salman and Brian's kind of started laughing when Ali Asmat said that," but he never wanted to. Ali Asmat particularly did not want to get qualified as a spiritual or Sufi rock group.
Right. Well, I mean, but just the name Sufi rock, right, itself, it kind of implies that, hey, you can only sort of like really blend Islamic elements and rock music if it's like so? Sufistic. But see, and I think the reason why is because, at least from my eyes, सूफी लाइक सूफियाना चीज़ें जो हैं वो ऐसी देखी जाती हैं कि हाँ ये बस सूफियाना चीज़ें ये मतलब पूरे तरीके से इस्लाम का हिस्सा नहीं है. Do you know what I mean? And I think like my question is like, why couldn't we just say that it was just rock music with like an Islamic element to it, or like a Muslim element to it? Right. Why do we have to say Sufi rock?
But the Sufism is not always qualified under Islam, right? There's also the perennialism that, and sure. Salman Ahmed actually throws these names out of people like Guy Eaton. Right. And Martin, Guy Eaton, Martin Lings, these are Westerners, but they have their Arabic names too. Like, I don't know Guy Eaton's name, but then Martin Lings' name is what, Abu Bakr Sirajuddin, something like that, right?
Right.
It is, right?
Yeah.
And these guys are sort of perennial.
Yeah.
That's why in Junoon songs, Junoon songs, you're gonna say Masjid mein tu, Mandir mein tu, Jeevan Sagar mein tu, right? So they like God is everywhere.
Well, so yeah, again, at the end of the day, I mean, we have to acknowledge that Sufi like sort of tradition does grow out of specifically Islamic tradition, and there's an element of sort of tasawwuf and this idea of discovering the self. But in fact, some of the early Sufi scholars were not people who, in any way, reneged on their responsibilities or their obligations to Islam. But that's a different topic.
Well, I mean,
but I guess what I'm trying to say is that by describing the Sufi rock, I think we are already engaging in this idea that you can't really fully have any sort of like music जो है वो हराम है, like things like we're already kind of commenting on that by calling it Sufi rock. Like, why can't we just say, it was rock music that had a distinctly Muslim influence?
See, a lot of that also has to do with like the evolution of Islam in the subcontinent,
right?
And I think, I don't know, maybe if you guys agree with me or not, and typically that's how it happened, where Islam starts to spread in certain region, and then typically it's those traditional Sufi type scholars like Khaja Muhyiddin Chishti, right? He's kind of credited to have spread Islam amongst Hindus, and they always localized Islam to the local culture, right?
Sure, it takes a local
they took Urf. Yeah. I guess Urf is the concept, and even though it kind of sometimes they would go like to the extreme, like mazars and whatnot, but Qawwali, it does come from bhajan.
Yeah.
If you listen to the bhajan, then it's Qawwali and bhajan are kind of the same, and then to a lot of like what we call innovations or bid'ah, whatever, did come out of that. So corrections of that did not take place until like the late 1800s and stuff. Like Shah Waliullah, who founded Deoband, right? He does not come in until way later. And then more recently with the politics that Pakistan got involved in, the benevolent Saudi money and the kind of things that created. But I think for Junoon and Salman Ahmed particularly, he always saw... and I will say that on his behalf, I hope I'm correct, that the authentic Islam of subcontinent, of India and Pakistan, is the Barelvi Sufi Islam that has those mazars and dhamals and, these qawwalis and whatnot.
Right, very distinctly syncretic, like subcontinent sort of elements, right? That include things like, the bhajan tradition and being able to sort of like have your naate and things like that.
Because Salman Ahmed is crazy in love with his own identity and culture, his Pakistani Muslim identity, and then it's evident in, if you guys look at the behind the scenes video of Naya Pakistan song,
right?
He says that he's talking to Shahi, and he's like, what do I feel about Pakistan? I love the people, I love the culture, and I love the spirituality of the place. That's why I'm using the word inshallah, right? Because to put that spiritual angle in there.
So wait, was there some sort of issue that others took with putting inshallah in there?
I think some of the, there's a group of people in Pakistan that is like so anti-Arab influence in Islam. They particularly hate hijab, right?
Yeah, but inshallah is such a like common sort of word.
I don't know if
right?
they hate people saying Allah Hafiz instead of Khuda Hafiz, which is interesting. I mean, they choose the Persian influence over the Arabic one, so I don't know. And they have no problem, with Valentine's Day and stuff. So it's like.
Well, so I mean, going back to what you were saying is that like Salman Ahmad's idea of, what religious identity Pakistan possesses and what can be described as his religious identity. I actually think that a lot of it, and this is something where, I mentioned that I take some issue with the way that he went about things. Well, for instance, the Rockstar and the Mullahs, right? I mean, that documentary. I think that it was a very narrow sort of scope, right? It was a very binary sort of vision of the fact that, like, first of all, there was a lot of this, Pakistan, in a country like Pakistan, right? How could you have such a rock band?
Which is the way Americans want to see it.
Right, but don't they get, like, don't they have all their guitars broken, like, at every single set that they, like, try to take up? I mean, first of all, that's not what all of Pakistan
so you
even
say
is.
Kind of played into that stereotype?
Well, I think inherently, and also like there was a white palatability going on, right, to a degree. And I'm not saying, look, I'm not saying that it was intentional.
Wait, what's white palatability?
Well, so I think whatever I think Western white audiences are okay with sort of seeing or want to see, right?
Which is a concept that it goes all the way back to
this idea that, first of all, why can't we just present Islam well, first of all, it's a complicated picture, and I do think Salman Ahmad was trying to complicate the picture, but I also think that there was this element of like, no, look at us. We also have music, right? We also
have rock and roll.
We also like have rock and roll. We like have Gibson guitars, like whatever, right? I mean, to me, it's sort of like, why do we have to engage in this? But I will say this. I say this now, sitting in 2019, right? I say this now, being in a position where I can look back and say, look, did we really need to do that? But I'm actually curious about your thoughts.
I mean,
in that moment, I think maybe that was needed.
When that movie came out, I think you remember, Omer, that on the message boards, we were actually offended by the movie, so we used to like engage with Salman. We used to talk to him, and we used to fight with him. A lot of the fans that would go on the message boards. I mean, I thought it was just because first of all, me being in the U.S. and I'm going to these local big Islamic centers like the one in Orange County. I'm listening to like Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, Hamza Yusuf. So my impression of Islam is like it's a great religion. It's very moderate. There's nothing wrong with it. It's everything's super great. And then I don't know about the groups in Pakistan that are actually preaching about killing each other. I don't know that side. So when Salman Ahmad puts that in the movie, I get offended. I'm like, whoa, this is not what Islam is. So why are you, equalizing those things? So we used to get in heated debates with him. But, later I would realize that, okay, things are kind of screwed up in Pakistan. There are religious people that spread a lot of hatred. They engage in violence. And these things happen. And
I think acknowledging that privileged position is very important for us to do.
So maybe Salman didn't cover all sides correctly, but I think it was really important to do what he did. And soon after I came to appreciate everything he did in that movie.
And I think what he was maybe, and you've mentioned this before, what he was trying to do is really trying to expand the conception of what Islam is, right? At that particular moment, there was a lot of learning, I think, that the rest of the world was doing about Islam. I think in many ways the Western world,
and that may have complicated more too, because
I think the Western world had already woken up to Islam.
This is that whole Musharraf's enlightened moderation era, which probably won out. Like if you culturally, and I wanted to start with that when I was talking about mid '90s culture being different from what it is now and mid 2000s whatnot. You पुराने वीडियोस उठा के देखो, उसमें सारी ख़वातीन जो है लड़कियां वो या तो तालियां बजानी या बैठी हुई हैं, वरना इनको शरीफों की तरह like रखा हुआ है, right? But then things started to change, and the modernization of it started to win out, and now you see girls engaging in it just as much as the guys and everything. And then now, for better or worse, now it's come to a point where I don't know how much of that traditional senses are left in Pakistan. Now, if you look at the dating culture that's prevalent in Pakistan right now, which is exactly like the white dating culture, and I'm not saying like guys and girls going out with not, I'm talking about straight up dating culture where you have, courtship, breakups, heartbreak, infidelity, all of that stuff. That's taking place right now.
Which, not to say that it didn't take place earlier, but yeah.
But it
in
wasn't
an
part of the
open
culture.
sort of way,
now,
yeah.
now I feel like it is. So back then things were different, and in the mid '90s you had a large pool in the middle, where you did not have to be a extreme Muslim, or an extremely liberal person. The pool in the middle was much larger, as it probably is right now. In the mid 2000s, there was a huge battle going on between both sides, and in that context, Salman's movie came out. And a lot of us who were kind of on the religious side.
Which movie were we talking about?
Still talking about Rockstar in the
Right.
Bus. And a lot of us who were kind of on the religious side we took offense to that movie. And at the same time, our antagonists, for lack of a better word, they really backed up Salman. They really took his side, which I think I talked in the last episode about the group of neoliberal type people who all of a sudden found out, oh, you know what? We're a Muslim too. And, so they started, hey, Sufism is our Islam now. Because, Sufism is so unthreatening. You don't have to, especially in their idea of Sufism, you don't have to pray and stuff. All you do is, sing songs or read poetry and whatnot, right? You don't have to follow the core tenets. You don't have to pray 5 times a day and stuff. That's their understanding of... And, they started supporting Salman. And Salman was probably... I don't know if he was, in that direction or not. But I do remember in... somebody call him up on a TV show and say, do you pray 5 times a day? And he said something like, oh, I have my own connection with God. So, I don't know. I mean, I've seen him pray, so I can't say that that's what he really believed in. But that was the battle that was happening.
I mean, so personal journeys aside of Salman or Ali or, and we should talk about Brian too. He was the non-Muslim member of the band. I think going back to what they were doing, what the band was doing, actually challenging your beliefs. Didn't matter what side you were on, but to an effect they did challenge, especially to those with conservative views or upbringings that were not privy to what else was going on, kind of sheltered upbringing, that their music, their ideology, and the themes challenged you and kind of broadened your horizons a little bit and opened your eyes to things that you would not have otherwise been open to or exposed to. So that was one key element of Junoon's spiritual ideas that they were espousing in their albums. Now, their first real spiritual album, started with Azadi. As
an album, yeah.
As a full thematic, spiritual, Sufi, whatever you want to call it. This was Azadi through and through. I think there wasn't any, love songs, as what you mentioned in the last episode, with the Pyar Mohabbat ke gaane.
Yeah.
There wasn't any, right? It was straight up one spiritual song after the other, after the other, after the other, from beginning to end. Pyar Bina. Oh, sorry, Yar Bina, not Pyar Bina.
Yeah.
Yar Bina.
Right.
But even that has a spiritual influence.
Yeah.
Sayuni was in there.
Wahadahu. I mean,
Wahadahu
can't be as
Yep.
in your face as that, right?
Yeah.
And Kyun Pareshan Hai Tu, Mahiwal, it's a folk song, but it has a
Khudi.
spiritual element to it. Khudi.
Muggane is...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, this is where they started, right? And it didn't end. This is where it took
Yeah,
off.
I mean, I think Parwaz was a combination of all of that. Because Parwaz was probably the most prolifically produced album, the most cleanest, the most heightened sound-wise.
Which they had to come to New York to do, from what I understand, like with Alec, what's his face?
I
John
don't know.
Alec.
I mean, I think back in those days,
Although Azadi was
Mikal
not
Hassan's studio was open too.
yeah,
so I don't
Azadi
know.
was not a badly produced album, but I think it was either mastered or recorded partially in New York City.
Organic.
So this is where Salman actually, so in the Azadi era, I don't remember him really being too out and open about the Sufi rock aspect of their identity. But with Parvaz and him kind of taking Bulle Shah's writing, the Sufi saint Bulle Shah, and just going all out, gung-ho on it, that this is inspired by Bulle Shah. Bulle Shah was this and that. He was a cool guy, and I'm inspired by him. And this is the first song on the first track was
Cool
Bulle,
guy.
right?
Yeah.
What was that?
It's a cool guy.
Cool guy. Yeah, I mean, he
So you
used that
talked
term.
about
He actually used that term in one of the songs before he starts singing. He goes, the Sufis of Sindh, they were
they were
just,
very
just-
cool
They
people.
were just chill, very cool guys, he had to make it.
And in many
relatable.
ways, actually, that album kind of revived interest in Bulle
Absolutely.
Shah.
Yeah, It did.
Yeah, and it became a.
And actually, that's another
Bulle
thing.
Shah
That's
is
another thing
now
that's-
part of the nightlife in Karachi because of that.
Well, look at Bollywood. Look what they did with that.
And
Bollywood as well,
Bollywood.
yeah. No, that's another thing that I think, like, to Junoon's credit and to many of these bands, frankly, but reviving these traditional, whoever you want to call, like, whatever you want to call them, figures, these traditional sort of like spiritual leaders, reviving their poetry, reviving their tradition, in a country that, like you said, was going through not just a lot of political turmoil, but also a lot of turmoil around its religious identity, around its core identity, upon which it was created, right? I mean, that is like, that's an eternal question that I think Pakistan will always have, is what is its identity? कहते हैं ना पाकिस्तान का मतलब क्या ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह. There are a lot of people in Pakistan who don't actually sort of subscribe to that, right? And will push back, and perhaps maybe even rightly so. I don't know. I think there's a particular way in which we need to embark on the project of thinking about what Pakistan actually means. But I think that it's a wonderful thing to do for these artists to be able to inject these sort of like or revive these voices of tradition of indigenous Islamic tradition.
Inclusive too. Now talk about.
Right.
So wait.
I brought up Brian. Talk
Hold on.
about.
To Hamad's point, though, Junoon's spiritual songs were not in the framework of a
Islamic
political
dogma.
Islamist,
Or even
sloganeering,
dogmatic
right?
Islam.
Like you mentioned, Pakistan ka matlab kya la ilaha. This is not the kind of songs. This was
Right.
more of a personal
Absolutely.
spirituality, right? That they were not as a national identity. They had the national identity, politics on a different side.
Yeah.
But this was on a completely different side.
That's
right?
interesting. I mean, now we're kind of like uncovering something even deeper where, like in some sense, and we talked about this last time, is that their politics are very kind of universalist and they're very humanistic, but their Islamic sort of like identity or whatever they espoused was a very personal,
Right.
personally rooted kind of.
And that's the
ethic,
nature
right?
of popular Sufi leanings.
So
right?
that kind of opens up another thing about Brian now, because you mentioned Brian being
Right.
a non-Muslim. He's also included in this because of his personal spirituality. There's no religious bars in any of these. So how does somebody who's a spiritual person himself? I mean, some of these videos, you know how the Junoon had a tradition, like they would gather in a circle and they would pray.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see Brian leading a prayer in one of those too, and he's from what I've known that he's been and he's Irish, so he could probably be Catholic. So maybe he was a devout Catholic.
Right.
So he could also relate to those messages.
You couldn't do what they were doing without having a non-spiritual person in the group, right? And Brian, I mean, let's talk about Brian. We've been talking about Salman as the kind of the architect of the music,
Right, yeah.
But let's talk about the bass, okay? The
bass.
the when Wahdahu la sharika lahu starts, that's Salman's playing some notes, but the bass that
Boom, 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 boom.
Right.
Oh yeah.
That's he's adding that low sense in there, right? And then mitti, sawal. I mean, those are like bass. Those are all reliant on bass.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Hey man, so we start talking about Brian's bass.
A person that is not on the same page,
Yeah.
they cannot collaborate and create a spiritual, mystical sounding sound like they did, right?
That's
So-
where magic happens, man. I mean, there's always बल्कि अभी वही नया पाकिस्तान का जो वीडियो था उसमें नुसरत हुसैन is actually talking about there's a शेर by गालिब के गैब से ख्याल आते हैं कहीं.
नुसरत भाई कैसे हैं आप?
The idea that you're doing, like we're sitting here together, but there's something metaphysical that needs to happen for us to kind of prop us to that level where where magic is happening, because you look at Ali, Salman, and Brian just going off on their own, and they don't have that same energy in the solo work
Yeah.
that they're doing, and once they come back together, they pick up right from where they left off.
But that's what's interesting, though, is that because you talked a little bit about, so obviously Ali Azmat's politics, I think, to some degree, differed, and you just mentioned that he kind of resisted the Sufi rock label. But man, I mean, when they come together, right? Like,
Right.
Jab Salman Ahmed is on that guitar and Ali Azmat is just, in his element with some
Right,
of these
yeah.
songs. Like, what gives, man? I mean, what is that about? Like, do you think it's one of those things where it just worked? Or do you really think that, they shared a particular vision of what they saw in the world and how they wanted to
So
express
we maybe
their
discussed
spirituality.
this. Maybe we discussed this, but these guys didn't just show up in a room together and create this magic, like meeting for the first time, right? This is a 15-year journey till they got to that point where they evolved together, where their sound evolved together to create something, a masterpiece as Parvaz or Azadi was, right? So you can we talked about this actually in what episode, the second Junoon episode, where Ali Azmat's vocals kind of took a turn at around Inqilab and Azadi. Before he sounded very
Oh,
popish.
Inqilab came out 5 years after Junoon was together. So
जब
it took
उनकी
them
आवाज
that long to find
फट गई।
their...
Awaz
yeah.
Pariyati, as you so eloquently described in a very
That's what I do, eloquence.
The very first episode or something,
I think
whatever
so.
we did.
But in
Yeah.
any case, that's all of those elements led to what that sound was created. So yeah, it was not like throw a few guys in the room and they got this thing going on.
You know what's interesting about Ali Azmat? Mid-90s, during the time of Inqilab and Azadi, or between them, Ali Azmat said something which I hope I'm saying this right, because it's going to be a very big statement. But the interviewer was asking these guys, like, what are their religious views and whatnot or affiliations? And, you know, Brian obviously said, I'm Christian. Salman's like, oh, I'm a Muslim. Ali Azmat, and I hope I remember this correctly, he said something like, you know, I'm kind of agnostic. Like, I like to believe that there's a God, but I don't know what's happening, whatnot. And then, keeping that in mind, then I listened to the lyrics of Maine Kabhi. And so, you know how some of these good atheist people that you've met in your life, right? I'm not talking about the nasty anti-theists that like just so full of hatred. I'm like talking about people that are seekers who are just, you know, agnostic or atheists. They can't bring themselves to believe in a God, right? But, you know, the sincere ones, they'll always be in a battle about it. They'll always be in this, like, uneasiness that, you know, I want to believe it, I just can't find the proper proofs or whatever to believe in it. And then, if you listen to the lyrics of Maine Kabhi, रंगों को देखा है, तस्वीरें देखी हैं, ख्वाबों को देखा है, तावीरें देखी हैं, मैंने सबको देखा है, लेकिन तुझको कभी नहीं देखा. Right? So that sounds like something an atheist, you know, a good sincere one would be singing to himself, like, I want to believe in you, but I just can't. किसी सोच में डी हुई जिंदगी, किसी आदमी को रास्ते, तुझे पाने की जस्तजू, कभी तुझको खोने के गम मुझे, right? So
and I think, to be honest with you, that perfect, even if there were these searching questions, even if there was more conviction that Salman Ahmed had, right, within this sort of, like, whatever you want to call it, the Islamic conception of whatever Allah is or spirituality is, it still blended very well. Because in Sayoni, you have Chan ek pal nahi, right? Chan ek pal nahi.
Right.
And so there's still, like, this, like, deeper question, right, of, like, you know, what am I looking for? Who am I looking for? How am I going to find it?
Yeah. So I mean, that's the theme of the seeker, right? That you're always seeking truth, right? There's no stopping. Even if you find belief, it does not keep you from seeking truth or higher levels of truth, unlocking higher levels. So that's where that was coming from.
So,
but you have to appreciate that, you know, obviously I think Ali Azmat's changed his tune since then.
He's changed a lot. I think Salman Ahmed's changed a little bit too.
But the one thing I really enjoy though is following their journey. I mean, you don't have to go sit down and search through their interviews to find out what they were going through. It's all in the songs, right?
Yep.
Like Maine Kabhi, I would have never had, you know, thought of it that way. It was just a song that was a good sing-along. But now that you look at it deeper, and Rooh Ki Pyas and all these songs, the truth comes out that this is their inner struggles, and they're putting it into their music, and that's what made it great.
Right. So now, over the years though, as they got older, you know, especially Ali Azmat got older, you know, he's got some daughters and stuff. So his views changed a lot, and, you know, he went through this phase where I think we talked about it in the last episode too, where he's spending a lot of time with this guy, Zaid Hamid. You know, they also have a very pro-Islam kind of a thing going on. So I think Ali Azmat, maybe, I don't know, in his particular life or in his personal life, if they started being more devout or not. I think Salman Ahmed may have. Salman Ahmed's wife, actually, I remember in an interview that she was saying that, you know, in New York they have a maid come in and who became Muslim because she saw them praying and stuff, and she started asking about Islam. So he eventually became Muslim. Ali Azmat, with his own thing, you know, he he's got a little bit more of a conservative bone in him now because the way he talks about Bollywood, especially. He talks about, when they talk about Bollywood, he criticizes Bollywood movies about, ye ladki aa rahi hai, naach rahi hai, nikkaron mein, aur ye wo. They talk about, the context of love in Bollywood. He's like, there's no such thing as love. This is all lust, he says. He's like, I didn't know what love was until my daughters were born, And then, I don't know, that's on the husband. Maybe Salman Ahmad probably had some influence with Junaid Jamshed too, because during that time, when Salman Ahmad was in the US, Junaid Jamshed was a lot more deeply immersed into Tabligh and whatnot in traditional Islam. And they kind of started reconciling after 2010, 2011. So it could be that Junaid Jamshed, they started talking more to each other, influenced each other, because Junaid Jamshed actually started chilling out a lot more too. Like in the beginning, that the Salafi burnout, that whole concept of Salafi burnout, when initially when you're like a born again, you go like 0 to 60, and everybody is
0 to 100 more like
0 to 100, and then you start kind of chilling out later on. So Junaid Jamshed later in his life was like a lot more chill. He would pick up the guitar in some function or whatever, and start playing. And then Salman Ahmad, we saw him at ISNA, which is a religious organization. Then we saw him at Islamic Relief show that we went to last year.
Junaid Jamshed was with Salman Ahmad at ISNA, right? They
Junaid Jamshed was there
stage.
too. Yeah.
Right. So Junaid Jamshed was actually touring the U.S. quite heavily, almost annually. He would go around help raising funds for different projects that he was involved with in Pakistan, or even helping Muslim organizations in America raise funds for their local programs. So Junaid, obviously he's Pakistani, and Pakistani Muslims, Pakistani Americans enjoyed attending his events. But ISNA is probably, at one point or still might be one of the largest Muslim American organizations. And it's not just for Pakistanis, it includes all Muslims in the United States. So to bring Salman Ahmad and Junaid Jamshed, and then for them both to sing Dil Pakistan on that stage,
right?
It was a bit controversial.
What was even more beautiful about, and we'll talk about Dil Pakistan, but the brothers from Native Deen, they're African Americans, and they came out on the stage saying Dil Pakistan. So that's Junaid Jamshed and Salman Ahmad. They can make people who are not Pakistani appreciate and love Pakistan because of the kind of people Salman and Junaid are. But what I want to say about ISNA though, what I appreciated about that moment so much is that, we went to some Junaid Jamshed events in masjids and whatnot, and a lot of those tablighi and sort of those traditional Muslim gatherings. And then there'll be Salman Ahmad, which, he'd probably be only allowed to play at, like an MPAC, which is a more sort of a modern liberal type of organization. So, there's spaces that Salman Ahmad would not be allowed to play, like, a traditional Muslim gathering, where Junaid Jamshed would be. And then organizations like MPAC, and again, I hate to be negative, but I have to be, but, organization like MPAC being so uptight, they would not have somebody like Junaid Jamshed come in and sing nuts because, it'd be like, traditional mullah, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But they would be okay with Salman Ahmad because of, they want to be white palatable. So, like, hey, look, this religious guy playing guitar, rocking, right? So ISNA was so genuine when they brought these two fellows together, and it was the most moderate place to be.
So staying on the topic of what Salman was doing in the United States, because he did take up residence here for a while, so he actually made a documentary about Michigan, right? Or what was that about?
No, the documentary was called It's My Country Too, and it was really about American Muslims being impacted in the post 9/11 world, where Iraq is under attack, Afghanistan is under occupation. So he goes and meets a lot of people from different places. He meets a rich Pakistani family in Colorado to care workers. He meets with Azhar Usman, the American Muslim comedian. He meets with a lot of people. The Hamdan family from the NYPD cadet who lost his life. I guess he was labeled as a suspect or whatever, but he was not given his proper due by New York Police Department. So, that was... And I think that documentary was probably the best work that Salman has done. Or at least in, something that we could relate to. So, yeah, and... there's again so much to unpack when we talk about religion, religious activism, and spirituality, all in the context of
So,
Junoon.
as far as their albums go, like at Parvaz, what came after Parvaz? Ishq?
Yeah.
Ishq had definitely spiritual
Andaz, Ishq,
elements
yeah.
to it, right? And that started with Sakinama,
Sakinama, yeah.
Iqbal's album. So, or Iqbal's not album, his poetry.
Well, I actually did want to talk about some of my personal connections actually to some of Junoon's religious, or I don't want to say I hate using that word, but kind of more the spiritual bent that they have. So I can say that. So for instance, I think "Kyun Pareshan Hai Tu," that was I think in Azadi, right?
Yeah, it was.
And around that time, I mean, I was a teenager, kind of going through a lot of teenage angst, and early teenage angst, frankly. But also, I was going through a big upheaval in my life. I was just about to move to Pakistan for a couple of years, and was sort of headed there, and feeling a lot of different emotions. And I actually went through a period where I was really ostracized there because of the cultural shock that I had. And frankly, I mean, ठीक है उर्दू तो आती थी, but nonetheless, people, all the kids around me weren't particularly too pleased that I would speak English, with an American accent. And it's weird how like this like.
But that can't be uncommon though. Like, there's a lot of burger. Never mind.
No, you're.
Go ahead.
आपको काफी यार मतलब बर्गर से काफी obsession पड़ा हुआ है यार आजकल आप सारी दिल की भड़ास निकाल लें आप
करना पड़ेगा वैसे. We should do one episode and what we
just on them
feel about other people.
that culture. No, but what I was about to say is that like songs like Kyun Pareshan Hai Tu, which I mean, some arguably like people might say, oh, like this is not a spiritual song, but actually I think it is. I mean, I think कई जहां और भी हैं, वही कहना ना कि मायूसी जो है वो गुनाह है, right? Like मायूसी जो है, that is something that we shouldn't sort of embody as Muslims who should always sort of be optimistic. But I will say the one song that I distinctly remember from my time in Pakistan going through a lot, which I think in so many ways, I mean, I was having this conversation with you earlier. I'm not gonna say, look, Junoon sort of saved me, but I think that in many ways, Junoon's impact in all these different ways of allowing me to be able to blend these parts of my identity. And one of the major things is that I do think many of us, especially those of us who are musicians, those of us who, like really deeply connect with music, and also are practicing or observant Muslims, I think there's like kabhi na kabhi zindagi mein ek wo lamha aata hai, wo like that moment comes where we're like, man, should we do this? Like, should we continue doing this anymore? Like, right? I mean, I'm sure you've asked.
Wait, in terms of music?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure like that existential, like sort of like that essential question around like, should I continue doing this? Like, should I,
To be honest, that's never come up for me.
Fantastic. मैं तालियां बजाऊंगा people. I'm actually very, very impressed that hasn't come, and I really want to know
because
more. But
I have my own limitations in other ways. Like I never have any Bollywood movies play in my home. I haven't had that.
So
even
you
before
never.
I had kids.
But that's the thing though, is that maybe then I don't know. Maybe bands like Junoon actually allowed you to easily reconcile that, because
Very
I can
much
tell
so.
you that
Very
that's
much
exactly what happened with me. Right?
No,
is
even,
that when I mean Tika, like I was coming to consciousness and I was sort of. So by the way, I was going through a lot of crap like in 1999, like being like the subject of a lot of terrible sort of like treatment in school and Karachi and all that. Really kind of being hazed. But I can tell you that one song like Mitti Mitti Mein Mil Jayenge, which
right.
is I think a favorite of everybody's. That was like, for me, it was like the great equalizer, right? I was like, yeah. I was like, you know what? सबको एक ही जगह जाना है. चाहे तुम कहीं से भी आओ, चाहे तुम कुछ भी बोलो, whoever you are, whatever you say to me right now, तुझे भी वहीं जाना है जहाँ मुझे भी जाना है. Like, इंसाफ तो होना ही है,
That's
right?
right.
And to me, like, I mean, honestly, as a 14-year-old who was going through a lot of crap at that point, man, I mean, just being able to express that through that vision and through that song, but it has a very distinctly Islamic flair to it, doesn't it? I mean, mitti mein mit jayenge,
absolutely,
bhulo na, right? I mean,
that's a very deep Islamic message.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea that like, your mortality is staring you in the face. The really, I mean, this really sort of like, I think profound sort of message that I think a lot of us don't think about is that we all will pass our death anniversary every year, but we never realize it.
Oof.
You know,
Wow.
Subhanallah, right?
Why
I mean,
don't you write some songs for
it's
Junoon?
every single year we pass our death anniversary, and we don't even know it, right? And so
Wow.
that's like I mean, but that's what it gets at, right? That's a deeply Islamic sort of concept of like, don't forget, bhulo na, right?
Absolutely.
So I just want to say that on a very personal level, Junoon has. And I was thinking about other bands who have like distinctly kind of Islamic elements to them. To be honest with you, I'm searching. Like, can you identify another band that has so deeply embodied
Nope.
such spiritual elements?
Even if
No.
it does exist, I mean, Junoon's is so genuine.
Right.
So here, if I want to take my personal take, or share my personal take, and I think I mentioned in the past where at a certain age you go through this identity or existential, not a crisis, but to either validate or search for further truth in what you're doing. Like you were saying, is this even worth continuing on? It doesn't have to be about music or
Right.
any path that you're on, right? You're kind of finding yourself. It typically happens around your early 20s or so, early to mid 20s. So I think what Junoon did was forever changed or spoiled, I want to say, how I approach music. Anytime now I listen to a new song, I'm like, what is this? What value does this add to me?
Meaning, you're looking
Right?
for meaning.
Yes, I'm looking for meaning in songs. Now, I go back and listen to some of the other old songs that I listened to, like Pearl Jam, for example, and I mean, beautiful, deep, meaningful, valuable songs to me, and I take more meaning out of it than I did before because after listening
And it's
to
an ever evolving story because your life is ever
exactly.
evolving,
So every
right?
10 years
it's
you
an
go
ever
back,
evolving connection.
right? You go back, revisit a song every 10 years, and it means something different because you've experienced life differently in the last decade. So I think I attribute this to Junoon because Junoon really opened my eyes to how to experience music because I was able to form an identity around that. So it was very important, uniquely important.
No, you
Absolutely.
mentioned Junoon and religion and our personal feelings. When me, you, and Omer, we started our band Project 26, our angle was to make Junoon like music. But we started writing our songs in English because we had a community of people that even the Desis that grew up here
That would listen to us.
and then we have Arab, Afghani, and Persian friends and whatnot, and we wanted them to listen to us as well because we were, for the most part, we started playing for this Muslim community in the U.S. We were playing at places like ISNA and these conferences and stuff.
But the fact that
But
you
it was
envisioned,
all Junoon oriented.
exactly,
It
right.
was
The
all
fact that just the fact that you thought that was even possible, that you could bring this like kind of rock element to a Muslim context.
exactly.
Was inspired by Junoon. And that's what I mean, is that for me, it was no longer mutually exclusive to do rock music and to also talk about deeper meaning
I would
or to
tell you
talk
one more
about
story.
Islam or your religious identity or convictions.
Initially the use of guitars now, you can see that in some of these Islamic conferences, ISNA, Muslim American Society, even there's a Islamic Center in Orange County. They have this patio area outside, and they'll have a performer come and play guitar there. Even though they select a different type. They have a selection of people they can only go to because they want to play it safe. But that's the kind of music they play. When we started out, it got up to that point over a number of years, where they were accepting these instruments to be played. Before it was like, no, that's haram, you can't do that. And we were part of that process. Our band Project 26 was part of that process that kind of introduced these instruments and good use of these instruments, which was palatable to these people in this community. A good friend of mine who's sort of this patriarch of American Islamic music, his name is Dawood Wernsby Ali. I was hanging out with him once, and he was like, dude, with your Project 26, you guys were ahead of your time. And I'm like, dude, you know why? Because we were following Junoon. And, because we saw the music that we could play for this community, we saw it in Junoon. So,
yeah, that's I can appreciate that, and I think the credit goes to that particular to Junoon. And I want to say it's interesting how this conversation itself evolved, right? I mean, and not to say that I don't remain critical. I have been critical of the ways in which sometimes And again, I want to mention that in retrospect, I think it's very easy for me to say that, maybe Junoon could have made different choices. Maybe Salman could have made different choices of how he was representing himself within this conversation around Islamic identity. Who is Muslim? What is Islam? What should be kind of the representation of our faith on the world stage. But at the same time, I think this is a really telling kind of observation that Omer made, is that they, when it came to their sort of religious expression or spiritual expression, it was deeply personal. And I think that all of us, in so many ways, can connect with that. And so, one request that I would make of our listeners is, throw out some songs that have deeply inspired you, and
share your story.
Share your stories. Tell us your stories about that personal connection, and tell us how that impacted you. And maybe it'll get back to Junoon.
So before we end, I'm gonna start with Ali. Your top spiritual song from Junoon.
Oh, for sure, Mitti.
Oh man, Hamad, did he just steal your thunder?
he really just did.
Now you have to pick a second one.
Oh gosh,
we know your top is Mitti. What's your second?
Man, I would say Sai. Tu Hi Sach.
Oh come on, man, that's everybody's.
Yeah, but you have to get deeper, right? To say Tu Hi. How does the lyrics go? Tu Hi Sacha. Tu Hi Mera Mola Sai, and just the truth behind the fact that that's it. That's what it's only you.
So why Mitti, Ali?
Because it's about death.
You're dark.
Yeah.
you're goth at heart.
It's the most realist reel that can reel.
This is the one truth in life, right? This is the one truth in life for everyone. Death. Right. For me, it's got to be Ghoom.
Ooh.
Not Ghoomtana. Ghoom.
Oh,
this is like an 8-minute epic metal spiritual. No, I'm not gonna sing it because I can't do it justice. But man, from the beginning, the mystical start of the song with the guitar to the epic solo.
That's South Asians' answer to heavy metal.
That is it.
To goth metal.
That for me, I will listen to that song, and I get high off of that song, man. I don't need drugs.
Oh yeah, it's
just
total.
Play that song for me. I'll isolate.
You gotta
myself.
turn the lights on, put some red light somewhere, and just
it'll do the trick.
Yeah.
Chalo. Until next time, guys. Hopefully we have a very unique episode after this one. So let's stay tuned. Share your thoughts. We look forward to speaking with you and interacting with you on our Facebook page. And until then, Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.